Today, we're going to talk about the most boring yet most essential component to overland and travel in general, and that is fuel range, which has a lot to do with capacity and MPG, miles per gallon. And we're going to show a short clip of our latest issue we ran into. Well, we made it down to pavement, and let's see how much it shows.
9 miles.
Oh man.
12 miles of gas station.
9 miles left on this fuel tank and
12 miles to the gas station.
Yeah.
There could be some walking.
That's a 3-mile difference in the deficit.
Let's hope the gauge isn't completely
Let's hope this is mostly downhill. And we are counting them down.
Only have 3 miles to empty.
3 miles.
We gained a whole mile, guys.
3 miles to empty and 4 miles on the GPS. All right, 1 mile. Do you think we'll make it?
Well, it says we have 1 mile to the gas station. Fingers crossed.
Uh-oh. We just hit the 0 miles to empty, but it's still going. Excellent.
We're still going. The gas station's half mile on our right.
It has a little bit of reserve fuel left, and
your destination will be on the right.
we're less than half of a mile to the fuel station, and it's almost downhill.
Ooh, we see the fuel station.
Ah, there it is. Look at that. We made it. This is a good thing to be seeing the pump right outside the window here, and it shows 0 left on the tank. The truck said 0 miles left, and it's a 34-gallon total size tank. And as you can see here, we got about 31.5 gallons. Our final math ended out that we had about 2.5 gallons of fuel remaining in our tank, even though it said we were out of fuel. But that's always good to keep about that much fuel left. Now, we did add 5 gallons of fuel in Yellow Pine at a ripoff of $7.43 a gallon. However, it did give us enough to make it to this gas station, so it was worth it, a lot cheaper than a tow bill. But it wasn't too bad considering we did travel 521 miles completely off-road for multiple weeks. Now, one of the biggest issues with modifying your four-wheel drive off-road truck so it looks cool and it does the overlandish part is that it ruins the fuel mileage. And the biggest problem with ruining your fuel mileage is that your fuel tank size doesn't increase, meaning you directly reduced how far you can drive, your total range while you travel. That's a huge problem. When figuring out your fuel range, the first thing you're gonna need to do is some testing with your current configuration of your truck off-road to figure out what you actually get for fuel mileage. Now, your fuel mileage is gonna vary a lot. If you drive off-road, let's say for 50 miles and the rest of it is highway miles, it's not gonna be a true actual off-road mileage, to help you out. But if you go out on a trip for, let's say, 200 miles off-road and you fill up, that'll give you a good indication of how bad your fuel mileage could be, and that's really the number you want to base everything off of. The other factor you need to consider is that just because you have a fuel tank that, let's say, is 20 or 30 gallons, you're not going to be able to use all of that. Realistically, you need to plan on leaving at least 2 gallons in the capacity of the tank. So you take whatever your tank capacity is rated for, subtract 2 or 3 gallons from that, and multiply it by your actual miles per gallon when you're traveling off-road. And that will give you your travel range. Now, how much travel range should you have while traveling off-road? Now, if you're gonna travel like how we do, where we go overlandish style to remote areas and we try to stay off-grid for multiple weeks at a time, more is always better. There's no two ways about that. For us, our experience has been 300 miles of range is kind of a pain in the butt because essentially you're gonna have to look for every fuel opportunity stop. A lot of times means that you're gonna be stopping in really small towns, small gas pumps, and you're gonna be paying a large premium because they can seriously charge anything they want. When we were in Yellow Pine, they charged $7.40 something cents a gallon to refill. And that's a pretty big gouging. Now, if you have a 400-mile range or more, I think that's the ideal spot to be in for overland travel, because it really gives you a lot of options and it's a lot less stressful. You're not going down to the wire quite as frequently, and you can skip some smaller towns that you just don't want to fill up at. Now, with our truck, we have a total fuel capacity between the primary and auxiliary tank of 55 gallons, meaning that if we leave about 2 gallons in the primary tank and we leave about 2 gallons in the auxiliary tank, where we say we're not going to use every drop of potential we have, then that leaves us somewhere around 51 gallons of fuel. And with our fuel mileage at around 9.5 miles per gallon, we can get about 500 miles off-road fairly comfortably, and that's pretty good. Some people have asked, what is the fuel mileage of our truck? And that is a loaded question because it's different all the time. However, we have about 20,000 miles on the truck, and we keep track of every fill up since brand new, and our overall average is 11. Now keep in mind, we never drive the truck without the camper or without a camper and a trailer or some variation of that. Our worst fuel mileage ever was 6.5 miles to the gallon, and that was pushing snow in four-wheel drive low range for days on end. That's the worst that it's ever been. The best we've had was just around 14, and we actually saw an increase after we passed 15,000 miles. Prior to that, we were getting about 10, a really solid 10 to maybe 10 and a half with the camper traveling just on the road as an average. And after 15,000 miles, we've actually seen a really solid 1 mile to the gallon increase, and we are getting right about 11 to 12 now. And that's been pretty consistent here since we've passed 15,000 miles. Now at 12 miles to the gallon, with our 50 gallons of usable capacity, leaving some reserve, that gives us a range of over 600 miles, which that's pretty excellent for on-road driving. It's still not excellent fuel economy, but it's a good amount of range. You can see as we're driving down this highway that's somewhat downhill, kind of what it looks like. This is our typical drive. We're basically driving around 60, and you can see, well, it's sort of downhill, that's why it's 20, but it's about 1800 RPM. That's pretty typical. We're still running the 6.2 liter V8 gasser engine with the 6-speed automatic transmission and the 430 axle gears with the 37-inch tires. That'll give you an idea of kind of how that looks for us, and we roll right around 10,000 pounds, probably a little over when we're totally loaded. Some of the expedition vehicles, get 1,000 miles of range, but they're carrying 100 gallons of fuel. The downside with carrying that much fuel is obviously the weight, and weight and storage area that it takes is a huge factor to consider as well. So I think there is a happy medium with it. One of the things we like with getting our range up over 500 miles is that we can oftentimes fill up at the fueling stations that are most cost effective. So a lot of times we will travel Costco gas stations and fill up, and we can jump from pretty good jumps from like Las Vegas to Reno to Southern Oregon, stuff like that, where we can get the lowest cost of fuel. And it does save a few bucks, especially when you have a huge amount of fuel and you're traveling a long ways. Now, we also have a Toyota Tacoma truck, which is completely stock at the moment. And right now it gets over 20 miles to the gallon. Now, one of the huge advantages with a stock rig like that and keeping it lightweight is that we don't have to carry as much fuel. The factory tank is over 20 gallons, and realistically, we can easily get over 400 miles on the tank as is. Now, if we start modifying it, all of a sudden we're getting down to 15 miles per gallon, all of a sudden that 20 gallons of fuel in the tank is not going to be sufficient to get us where we want to go. we're gonna have to carry another 10 gallons or more of fuel, which is gonna be an issue just to figure out how to carry it and the weight, which is limited capacity in a Tacoma. One of the things you want to really consider is where you're going, and if all those modifications are necessary, maybe you can stick with a stock size tire, stock gearing, maybe add some suspension for some height and some armor, and not go quite so crazy with modifications that will ruin your fuel mileage and kill your range, causing you to need to spend more money on auxiliary tanks or large factory replacement tanks. Now, with our F-250, there wasn't a factory replacement tank available because it's a gas engine, and we had a custom auxiliary tank made for it, which was great, but it is expensive. I think it was just under 900 bucks by the time we had it built and shipped to us. But in my opinion, it's totally worth it because it was a game changer to get our range where we wanted it to be. With our big Super Duty truck, the biggest factor to us is be able to travel in comfort because we go for extended periods of times. We'll be out for months on end and primarily staying completely off grid, especially in areas with limited or no services. And that extra range is hugely beneficial. The modifications on it, we use quite a lot for more rough off-roading. So for us, it's worth the sacrifice of having to carry the extra weight with us. Anyways, before you go crazy with modifying your vehicle for off-road or overlanding, make sure to pay close attention to your fuel range, because that will really cut your adventure short and or put a major damper on it, because you will have to be considering fuel constantly rather than enjoying the places you want to go and how you want to travel. And like I said, the best thing to do is make sure you get enough fuel range to get up ideally into that 400 plus mile range, because that's really going to be a huge benefit when you're traveling long range and really give you a lot of flexibility. Now, if you're just going out for day trips and whatnot like that, maybe range isn't as important to you and you could do whatever you want, which is great. But if you want to start getting into more long range, overlandy type travel and traveling to super remote areas, then that fuel range is going to come in huge for you while you travel. Hope you found this video helpful for you and something to consider before you go crazy with modifications. And certainly you want to pay attention to your fuel range. If you liked it, give us a thumbs up. If you have any comments or questions, post them up below. We'll catch you on the next one.